Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave 400 kilometers from the mainland, is at the center of growing geopolitical tensions. Its strategic location near Europe and the Baltic Fleet has been vital for Russia's anti-NATO agenda. However, the ongoing war in Ukraine is making Kaliningrad harder to govern, fueling separatist movements and stronger Western ties. In this video, we'll explore the future of Kaliningrad and its significance for both Russia and global stability. The impact of Kaliningrad in recent Russian history. Losing Kaliningrad would have a profound impact on Russia, as the exclave plays a crucial role in its military strategy. In the early stages of the Ukraine invasion, Putin's plans were derailed by a retreat from key cities, leaving Russia vulnerable to counterattacks. To regain control, Putin relied on nuclear deterrence, with Kaliningrad becoming central to this strategy. He conducted military drills there to demonstrate the reach of Russia's nuclear arsenal, showcasing its ability to target NATO members. Kaliningrad's strategic significance is often overlooked, despite its location at NATO's weak point, the Szwolki Gap. Originally known as Königsberg, the region was handed to the Soviet Union after World War II, and its demographics have shifted significantly since. In recent years, Kaliningrad has faced growing isolation due to NATO's expansion and Western sanctions following the invasion of Ukraine. Kaliningrad has become a critical site for Russia's military, with investments in infrastructure to ensure its autonomy, particularly as relations with neighboring countries deteriorate. The exclave relies heavily on Poland and Lithuania for supplies, but EU sanctions have disrupted trade, impacting residents. Lithuania, a NATO member, has closed its airspace and imposed rail restrictions, heightening tensions. Any direct military action against Lithuania would trigger NATO's Article 5, which could escalate the situation further. With the U.S. committed to defending NATO territories, Putin must carefully consider his next move. The Szwolki Gap worries the West. Returning to the Szwolki Gap, the 100-kilometer Lithuanian-Polish border divides Kaliningrad from pro-Russian Belarus. Why is this a huge Western concern? A stronger Russian presence along the gap would isolate Lithuania and Latvia from Poland and the EU. This is why several Western militaries predict Russia will target this route first if the Ukraine war evolves into a hot confrontation with NATO. Because the Szwolki Gap would make NATO reinforcement of the Baltic republics almost impossible in a fight with Russia. Russia could quickly fortify this narrow strip, rendering NATO forces vulnerable. Many wargame simulations anticipate terrible casualties if NATO soldiers cross through it. Putin's perceived readiness to sacrifice troops would also help him isolate the Baltic states and preserve his stronghold in Kaliningrad through the Szwolki Gap. Russia might enter from east and west, cutting Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia isolated from NATO. But this step would also provoke an immediate conflict between Moscow and NATO's several nuclear-armed members, which might lead to an unprecedented disaster if not handled wisely. Putin's attack on Poland or Lithuania would trigger NATO's mutual defense guarantee. NATO's response is unknown. NATO's main concern is the Baltics' vulnerability to Russian assault. NATO's security strategy has changed due to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Even doubters increasingly understand the need for advanced defense in Eastern Europe as they ponder stationing more soldiers to deter an attack. NATO worries about Wagner PMC. The Wagner PMC, or Wagner Company, a dangerous Russian mercenary company, is purportedly working in the Szwolki corridor, which Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki highlighted worries about recently. Over 100 Wagner mercenaries are near Grodno's Szwolki Gap, according to intelligence reports. Mercenaries posing as Belarusian border guards or migrants to penetrate Polish territory and destabilize the region is Morawiecki's main concern. Given Poland's military's importance to the region's defense, Putin may try to exploit historical tensions between Poland and Lithuania over the Szwolki Gap as he did in Donbass. After a fighter mutiny, the Wagner group lost some credibility, but showed that it was willing to use violent measures to achieve its hidden political and military goals. The Wagner group, supported by Russian elites, caught the attention of the West and the Kremlin, which reached an agreement to terminate the mutiny. Wagner fighters were moved to Belarus in large numbers. Concerning suspicions suggest the Wagner group was involved in Niger's military coup that overthrew its pro-Western democratically elected government. Wagner head Yevgeny Prigozhin praised the coup, and Niger's new military leadership welcomed the help. Could the Wagner PMC destabilize Eastern Europe? That's a current NATO worry. Putin may have recruited these rowdy mercenaries to test NATO's resolve through a series of planned measures. When non-state actors like the Wagner group in sight, what can they do? Russian plausible deniability comes from this uncertainty. NATO requires better surveillance, intelligence sharing, and a coordinated response to such conflicts to avoid this disaster. Some think the Szwolki Gap is overhyped. Misperceptions about its military value and fragility give it strategic importance. Some wonder why Russia would need to physically close the gap or capture Baltic territory to block NATO forces. Geographical boundaries wouldn't matter in a major NATO-Russia military conflict. Additionally, the Szwolki Gap lacks natural features that would give military problems or opportunities. NATO forces might easily destroy regional Russian assets. Any aggressive action in the region could provoke political issues for Moscow and potentially trigger NATO's Article 5, which Putin seeks to avoid. The strategic importance of the Szwolki Gap works both ways, as Kaliningrad and other Russian assets could easily be targeted by NATO. Russia may face logistical challenges in securing the gap, similar to those seen during the Ukraine invasion. Some analysts fear that overestimating its value could prompt NATO to increase its military presence, escalating tensions. Putin would likely view such a buildup as a direct threat to Kaliningrad and Belarus, leading to an exaggerated military response and possibly further NATO engagement. A dispersed military strategy could increase NATO's involvement and deter further Russian aggression, while Russia's long-range missiles could target NATO forces without relying on the Szwolki Gap. Kaliningrad's role in Russia's defense strategy grew after the Ukraine invasion, with nuclear threats used to deter NATO. While Putin has made nuclear threats to sway public opinion, global leaders remain skeptical of their credibility. Despite hardliners calling for nuclear action, Putin has maintained a more measured stance. Some Russian hardliners argue that nuclear weapons are necessary to protect borders like Kaliningrad, while Putin has highlighted new nuclear capabilities, including a long-range cruise missile, warning that NATO's expansion could lead to nuclear weapons in the Baltics. Lithuania's defense minister has claimed Russia has nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad, though this remains unconfirmed. The addition of Finland and Sweden to NATO in 2023, driven by fears of Russian aggression, highlights the shifting security dynamics in Northern Europe. Both countries joined NATO for Article 5 protection, with Finland recalling the 1939 Soviet invasion and Sweden reacting to Russian activities in the region. Sweden and Finland joined NATO. Putin's red lines are increasingly violated without consequences, as Finland and Sweden join NATO and Western nations provide military aid to Ukraine. While Putin may resort to nuclear weapons if he loses Crimea, the likelihood of him triggering a catastrophic nuclear war seems to be decreasing as the conflict continues. Even if the Ukraine war ends poorly, the future of Russia's military recovery is a key concern, especially for the Baltic region, a vital hub for both Russia and NATO. Moscow's significant military modernization investments appear to have been largely wasted, and Russia's weakened economy may struggle to support similar investments in the future. After the war, global nuclear arms control must be restored, with Moscow needing to rebuild treaties that have been undermined by its nuclear threats. Despite Putin's opposition to nuclear disarmament, some political and military leaders in Russia are growing wary of reckless nuclear threats. recognizing the impracticality of nuclear warfare. His successor will likely need to shift away from a nuclear-centric approach and de-escalate tensions in the Nordic-Baltic region to avoid an unwinnable arms race with NATO. Putin's veiled nuclear threats may be used to distract from Kaliningrad's strategic importance, but time is running out. Separatist movements in Kaliningrad, which have existed since the 1990s, are gaining momentum, fueled by the Exclave's isolation and economic challenges. Moscow has clamped down on such sentiments, but separatist talks persist, reflecting a growing divide between Kaliningrad and neighboring countries like Lithuania and Poland. Baltic protests. It is difficult to gauge the level of support for independence in Kaliningrad due to Kremlin control, with many residents cautious about openly supporting it. The Baltic Republican Party, BRP, founded in 1993 by Königsberg residents, is a significant voice. Before the Ukraine invasion, BRP members protested outside the Russian consulate in Warsaw, calling for the demilitarization of the Exclave. In a 2023 unlawful online vote involving 5 Russian regions, 95,567 people, 19.4% of the population, voted for independence. However, the data comes mainly from outside Russia or pre-Ukraine war sources, so the results might reflect a pro-independence bias. The vote may have reignited a desire for independence, emboldening the BRP to push for secession. The party insists Kaliningrad should be part of Europe, citing the region's pre-Soviet German identity as Königsberg. Party participation has been rising, and if the Ukraine war ends, Kaliningrad could gain more autonomy or even independence, depending on Russia's post-war situation. The Kremlin will continue to suppress separatism, as losing territory is unacceptable to Russia. Despite European support, Kaliningrad's statehood may remain unlikely unless Russian society undergoes significant post-war changes. The drive for an independent Königsberg will persist, waiting for favorable conditions. Ukraine's war outcome determines Kaliningrad's future. The future of Kaliningrad hinges on the outcome of the Ukraine war, which could either pave the way for its independence or end that prospect permanently. As Finland and Sweden joined NATO, along with Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, Kaliningrad's role shifted from a strategic asset to a burden for Russia. The potential for Russia to block NATO through the Szwolki Gap has diminished significantly, as NATO can now bypass it, deploying forces from the north, by sea, or by air, avoiding Kaliningrad's missile and air defense systems. Kaliningrad's strategic importance has diminished so much that the French Institute of International Relations noted that NATO's expansion has undermined Russia's military superiority in the region. During its Ukraine invasion, Russia redeployed key forces, including its Air Assault Division and Marine Brigade, leaving Kaliningrad vulnerable. Russia's access to Belarus remains a plus, but its military limitations are evident, with Russian forces relying on Belarusian air bases and pre-war ammunition. Putin's decision to move non-strategic nuclear warheads to Belarus raised concerns, especially after the Wagner mercenaries' involvement in June 2023. Despite the threat, Poland can handle the situation, and the presence of Wagner mercenaries near Kaliningrad's nuclear facilities doesn't significantly alter the balance. After recent developments, Russia has little chance of regaining control in the Baltic region or matching NATO's forces. Putin may continue nuclear saber-rattling, possibly even deploying nuclear weapons to Kaliningrad. But these gestures will likely be ineffective in reversing Russia's strategic decline. Thanks for watching today's video. We believe a new Russian leader will prioritize collaboration and stability over military conflict with the West, especially in the Baltics. But what about Kaliningrad? Is it the key to Baltic control? Will it matter if Russia lessens its focus there? Also, can Putin carry out his nuclear threats, or are they a ruse?